อันนี้คุณโตอันนี้ทำงานไม่ได้นะลูกอันนี้ก็โอเค
อันนี้ใช้ตอน first time รอบที่แล้ว
Okay, we are online already. Okay, welcome to everyone to this second What's Happening in Myanmar updates, a collaboration of Junction, a forum, a venue on Southeast Asia, all kind of issues related to Southeast Asia, and Irrawaddy, one of the leading newspaper from Myanmar and about Myanmar and Southeast Asia. We are again very pleased to have with us Aung, the chef editor of the Irrawaddy, who will give, like the last time, an update on what has happened in the last 2 weeks about Myanmar, a country that is undergoing what I would call an coup that has been done more than 2 months ago, and that is escalating into more violence and abuse. Out of this concern, we try to understand the complexity of the situation, and Aung will give a brief presentation about 15 minutes of what are the key issues in these last 2 weeks before going into question and answer. Aung, please. Unmute.
I was unmuting. So, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me again. Well, last 2 weeks has happened a lot. Before I was talking to you now, I was a brief chat with the colleagues in my office, also with Leah, and I was telling them that also heard that the regime seems to be winning last 2 weeks because of, if you see the large number of protests that pour to the streets has been subsided. There are more violence, there are more killings on the streets, but particularly if you look at in Yangon, where there are hundreds of thousands of people took to the street 4 or 5 weeks ago, they disappeared. In Mandalay, the second largest city, a lot of people had joined and took to the streets, but also they disappeared. And they are in Sagaing region and Moya, these areas where there are still protests ongoing. But in like the former capitals, Yangon and Mandalay and Naypyidaw and other places, the protest has been drying up. Why? Because I think the military council, the soldiers and police, they came on more violent, and they shoot people at random. Even though if you are not a protester, they will shoot at you. So I think now it's a climate of fear descending into the streets in Yangon, and people do not dare to go out. That is why I was sharing my impression that last week we've seen the military was struggling, trying to control the population and trying to control the streets and trying to put the laws and orders, so to speak, on the streets. And they're very determined to keep control of the population, keep the protest away. Then you can also see that a lot of opposition members, even celebrities and activists and singers and even the beauty blogger and model boys and girls, they've been arrested last night. A lot of people have been arrested over the last week. They were in prison now. But that means that how the regime is trying to control the resistance. But also you can see that there are youth and youth members who may be taking up the arms training in the border areas. They may be coming back, or they already back in some areas in Myanmar or Burma, and they are in like the Zagai region and in the Magui region in the upper north and the central Burma and central Myanmar area. There's some violence clashes taking place. If you see it in the last 2 days, there's a military style operation, a crackdown against a protest took place in the Calais area, which is very close to India area. So you can see that how the military was trying to control the protest. And also, second thing I want to talk about is last 2 weeks we saw the CRPH. This is they announced the Federal Democracy Charter, and they announced the formation of the a new government, which will be coming to announce, I think, in a few weeks, or maybe within this week or next week it will happen. It should happen, I think. And also the drafting of the new constitution is going to take place. So a lot of people inside the country wholeheartedly support, including the ethnic minorities group, support the CRPH. But who are CRPH and what are CRPH? And we need to understand a bit on that, because CRPH they are members, mostly members, NLD members, the elected representative. So they have a huge mandate, and they have a legitimacy to form a government, to form a parliament body, to work on it. But they are also on the run. This is what we need to understand. And they are in somewhere in the, I believe, in the safe houses. They're still working, or else some of members of CRPH are in ethnic region where there are the ethnic insurgents control area, where they still keep working and trying to communicate with the international community, diplomats, stakeholders inside and outside the country. So, and you know that the CRPH is quite interesting because of they have announced that this charter full of democracy and federalism and equal rights and self-determination and all kinds of words that we hardly heard in the last 5 years. And NLD itself was accused of being ignoring the plight of the ethnic minorities and ethnic groups, and some ethnic leaders have a very cautious approach towards NLD. As you know, if you look at in the past, they are quite skeptical of the NLD, but now I think they are tone, the language, the approach has changed dramatically because of the military coup, and they have become much more accessible and trying to approach the different kinds of ethnic groups, including Kachin, Karen, Shan. They have constantly holding a dialogue with those people. So this is very interesting. Also, I heard that yesterday, we are trying to confirm that Chinese diplomats are trying to establish contact with the CRPH member inside the country. As far as I understand, they held a visual conference with the CRPH member. This is a new development. The Chinese are starting to get involved with the parallel opposition, or whatever you want to call it, government or interim government. They're trying to get the opinions of CRPH members, which is, I think it's last 2 weeks. This is a new development. I don't think you have seen it in a report yet. So you are privileged, and we are privileged to share this information that Chinese has approached and made a gesture, at least 1 hour long meeting with the CRPH members, which is, I think, very interesting. And I think lastly, I think you might, in the last 2 weeks, you might also see that ASEAN is holding we heard this ASEAN is holding a special summit or emergency summit at the end of April. We don't know how the ASEAN is going to react, and how the middle power going to trying to intervene in the ASEAN, and how the ASEAN, if they have a bones, if they have enough power, if they have enough influence to change the course or intervene, or at least or come up with a consensus or strong voice and strong languages. But meanwhile, you can see Singapore and pushing and exercising a strong language, as well as Indonesia and Malaysia. And also last 2 weeks, one of the ASEAN members, Thailand, also see a lot of influx of refugees coming into the Thailand, and also airstrike by the Burmese military junta to some areas along the Karen, along the area with Thailand and Burma. Because of that area seems to be having gold mines, as well as strong Korean insurgent forces are very active, and also suspected that some CRPH members may be hiding in that area. And also in that particular area, CRPH members and that Korean group have a much more cordial relationship. So after that, the punishment came. The punishment means military constantly send jet fighters and plane to start to attack those areas. But they are not. Actually, when you look at the story, they were not attacking the Korean insurgents. A lot of civilians population are hit by the attack, and thousands of refugees trying to flee to Thailand. And in that sense, you can also see that how Thailand is responding to this crisis, because how Thailand in the past was somehow heaven for the refugees and people, political activists who would flee to Thailand. But this time I think there are some members in the Thai establishment trying to prevent the refugees coming into the Thai territory. Even though if you look at one story is that in the north, in Mae Hong Son area, even though Mae Hong Son governor came out to say that I'm going to open a humanitarian center for refugees who flee to the Thailand or Thai soil. But next day, the checkpoints have stayed closed. So I think you can clearly see the question of who is calling the shots. So I think even though governor wanted to extend his humanitarian gesture towards refugees, he was told not to do so. So I think there are different players in Thailand also who trying to who would like to welcome the refugees or activists or who flee from the political persecution, but still they cannot come to Thailand. This is what we have seen in the last 2 weeks. And lastly, I don't want to talk about it, but Leah was very passionate about it, which is about CNN. CNN crew were allowed to enter to Burma, and they were escorted. They were given a nighttime sleep in a nice place, I believe, in a military compound, and do a reporting on what is happening in Burma. So you can see that the CNN reporters, and they were talking to a lot of people inside the country, in the marketplaces. 11 people were arrested. So far, we heard that 8 people have been released. We don't know the remaining members, whether they have been released, and how all those people who are arrested, how they face torture or any kind of physical intimidation or during the detention. We don't know. But I'm myself a journalist, and I don't believe in parachute journalism. But CNN came out and said that, one anchor came out and said, "Oh, we need you. We had to be there. You have to be there." He was telling to his own staff, who are reporting probably from the military compound inside the country. I felt a little bit. I feel like to vomit. I feel like to throw it up because of you can clearly see that even my team members are hiding, taking a huge risk. A lot of media inside the country can no longer work, that can no longer function inside the country and work. And CNN is invited, escorted, guided, and embedded by the military junta to highlight what is happening inside the country. There is nothing new what CNN has said in the reporting, and then I think we have been reporting all these stories that what CNN said in 3 minutes, 5 minutes, narrative. So So this is what we have seen in the last 2 weeks, and CIPH and the international response, as well as refugees fleeing to the border areas, and more importantly, the coming interim government and a new constitution, as well as the China engagement and then the West. So I think I better stop here, and so you have more time to ask me questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aung, and no, CNN was not my topic, but it's good that you stressed the ethics of this kind of journalism. I open the floor. We have an opportunity for you to ask any kind of question about what has been said, as well as other questions you may have regarding the current situation in Myanmar. Please write in the chat room, and for those who are following on Facebook, you can also write, and we will try to include the question. I will start with the question which was from the previous, while I wait for the new question, which was from the previous update, which was, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, it's, of course, after what you have said at the beginning, this question seems even more relevant in a sense. What is happening, we know it's going to take a very long time and it's not going to be easy, but is there any positive side that you see some hope in this kind of situation, and what can be done to work on this? Maybe you can answer this while we are waiting for people to ask questions.
So your question is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, this was one participant of the previous update.
Yeah, I think I want to also thank everyone that last time all of you asked a very fantastic, a great question, and the questions are very informative and very educative. And I want to thank you all for all your questions. The great questions you asked. And I did not have enough time to answer all, and it was a bit of time limitations. So I light at the end of the tunnel. We have gone through this. I met with a lot of people last week talking about past and present and future. Future seems to be bleak. I said bleak. I don't see light at the end of the tunnel, whether there's a light at the tunnel. There must be. And I'm still very cautiously hopeful, or maybe optimistic, but not the short term. I think it's the longer term. There are a lot of people inside the country, understandable and very emotional and very passionate, who have seen the death and who have lost the relatives, who have seen the friends being shot, dead and killed. And they wanted to see some kind of change coming soon. Even the outside intervention, I think it is very unlikely. Any kind of outside intervention coming to Burma to rescue, to liberate. But at the same time, I think we have to look at a bit more medium term, and if I may say, like at least 3 to 5 years term. I think. But meanwhile, you may ask me why 3 to 5 years. I don't have a clear answer why in 3 to 5 years. But I think in the meanwhile, because it's hopeful, because the regime has no legitimacy. The regime cannot stay function like a government. And the people resistant inside the country is very, very, very strong. It's not like before. I've never seen it like that before. As people are refusing to join the government or regime or government to function. I mean, the government servants or civil servants refuse to join the military junta, and they will keep their strong opposition, even though they cannot able to take to the street these days today. And these are the factors that people resistant are going very strong. When British came to our country in 1885, finally when they took over the northern part of Burma, they underestimated the whole resistance movement. It took 10 years for British to put down the whole resistance. And this regime, it is not occupying forces, but they are our own military forces. And they were shocked and they were surprised to see that very resilient and strong resistance coming and forming from within the countries, not only the Burman population, but also from ethnic minorities, which is very interesting. And that's why I think it's hopeful that this regime is forced to deal with this difficult situation. They don't have, externally, they don't have a legitimacy. That's why I keep saying that this attempted coup may be successful one day. Looking at the last 2 weeks movement activities, they may be winning at some stage and trying to control the streets, but they are not winning hearts and minds of the Burmese people. Not at all. And Burmese people inside the country, and they want to fight the finish. They want to finish the fight. So I think this is very different situation we have faced. And that's why I think the question is whether there's a light at the end of the tunnel, whether there will be election, or what kind of election is going to be held, what kind of international pressure, particularly the regional governments and the investors, how are they going to put pressure on the regime? We still have to see how things are going to develop. Very interesting light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, of course. I think I'm still very much hoping that this time we don't have to wait like in 1988. I had to wait and work hard. We all have to work hard from 1988 to 2012 until we were able to go home. It took about over 20 years to work hard to reach to that stage. Now we are back to square one. And this time, with our resources, with our institutional memories, with our experiences, inside and outside, and different kind of generation. The generation is so important. I think very different generation. I salute them, that the way that they work and the way that they confront the barbarian regime, you know, the under. I think there's a hope that they give you hope that things are not going to be as bleak as you think. Thank you very much, Leah. I cannot hear you.
Sorry, I always forget to unmute. So there are 3 questions already come in. One is about do you see a clear trend of civilians taking up arms, especially among the Burman majority? And also there has been news about a clash of the military civilian in Tamil. So this is related to the first question, whether you see this as a growing trend. Second question about the family members of the military. So the military, of course, have many children and grandchildren. What is happening with them? Are they supporting or not supporting? Are they solidary to their relatives, armed relative? And the third one is related to what you were talking, and also to the that seems that there is less people on the street. So does this mean that there is less enthusiasm for the fight, or on the contrary, that people are going underground and find other way of protesting to be able to continue the fight for a very long time? And then there are some more questions coming in, but let's start with these 3 first.
Yeah, all questions are great. Thank you. You guys always surprise me with these questions. So the first question is civilians
Public.
Civilians taking up arms. Yes, they do. Even in Thailand, I lived in Thailand. We see the increase of my colleagues also observed that my Thai colleagues also observed that the increase of arms sales and also drugs. drugs are coming from Burma, of course. The arms are going inside the country, of course, through the black market. And last 2 weeks ago, you've seen that South Korea made small arms, grenades, and ammunition delivered or confiscated along the Thai-Myanmar border areas. We don't know where these arms are going or intended to go. But obviously, signs are very obvious that there are people inside the countries who decided to take up the arms. And if you look at the second question about the Tamil, in Tamil area, what happened was awful. Because of the military launcher, very like a military operation against those protests who fortified the areas and made a very defensive mood. So to combine these two questions, yes, people, the youth particularly, are taking up trainings, I think, in some areas. I don't know where. I wish I knew, but I think some areas in the north, some area in the south. And also there are homemade weapons and do-it-yourself weapons. There are a lot of homemade weapons being used in Tamil area and Sagai area to defend themselves, also to attack the military personnels, police personnels, to attack the authorities, government houses and the buildings. So this is becoming more and more common, and that's worries that me and everyone that whether the country is sliding into the civil strife or to put it more larger degree or the civil war. If there are more arms coming into the country, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people, doesn't matter whether you are Burman or ethnic minorities, they will take up the arms against the regime, and we will see more bloodshed and bloodbath and more killings, because I can see that the military is Burmese military. I mean, they will handle it, with no mercy, and the way they handled in the border-based insurgents, we have seen it, and with if anyone take up the arms, I think they will be dealt very violently by the military. I'm afraid to say that, and that is something that I want to answer two of your questions. And family members of military generals, yes, I think there are a lot of family members of military generals who are also, I'm assuming, some of them we know, I'm assuming that they are very uncomfortable with what is happening. And even the retired military leaders, some of the military leaders who are moderate, known to be moderate, are very, very uncomfortable with what is happening on the streets because of the way that random killings, not even a systematic, more like a barbarian style type of killing, shooting at everyone, whoever they seen. And also people who were taken to the detention center overnight, they were tortured to death, and then only the dead body are returned. That kind of behavior and the style of intimidation and arrest and the torture and the brutal, I think I'm sure that a lot of officers and their family members are scared. They are afraid of reprisal. They are afraid of revenge. And also the soldiers, officer, even before the coup. Yeah, as a journalist, I also talked to some of the military officer. They've been told not to use the social media and Facebook even before the coup. Because of social media and Facebook, because of even now soldiers can afford to have phones. So they can, when they have a break, they can look at the social media, they can look at the phones, and they can see the pictures, images, what is happening there. And they will be they will start to think, and they will start to have a discussion. They will start to have a debate with the family members. This is what the top military leaders fear most. That's why even the mid-ranking officers, some of them I know, and I had used to engage with them, and they were told by the top commanders that we were not allowed to use social media and Facebook anymore because of, now he said, one of them said, I used the VPN to try to jump the bypass the Facebook and see what is happening. And so this is, I think that's what this the fear itself also govern the Myanmar's strongest institution, the military and forces, that they try and isolate the people, the soldiers and officer, and then being brainwashed, saying that Aung San Suu Kyi is a problem. The NLD was the one who cheated the election, and they were very corrupt, and how the other foreign elements involved in trying to give the prop up the elected government to extend to remain in power. That kind of propaganda being fed inside the military institution. Yeah. So at the same time, externally, the family members of the military generals, they are very worried about the sanction because of a lot of them are also filthy rich. If you look at senior General May Online's family members, they have a lot of involvement in the business, and they have a huge business empire. And because of the incoming or already coming these sanctions from the West, trying to cut the lifeline of the family members and financial pipelines, and they are very worried about repercussions. They are very worried about their business will be hit hard in the long term. And of course, they're very worried not because of they're worried that the people are being killed on the streets, but because of either they are losing their business empire and their business interests and their connection with the outside world. That's what they are worried most, I think. And what is your last question? Less people on the streets? Sorry.
How you read less people on the street? Is this less support for the demonstration because of fear, etc., or is because people are going underground to continue a more sustained fight?
Well, I think both. I think fear. I said earlier that the military, the way that they confront or challenge, to intimidate, they unleash the brute force on the streets. It was far beyond, even compared to 1988 massacres. I think that this time it's like a wild beast unleashed to the streets and do whatever it wants to do. So like that. So that's why people do not dare to go out. That only make the people very upset and angry. And a lot of people also going underground. A lot of people are deciding to move to or flee to the border areas, looking for the future, or looking for the jobs, or looking for the arms, looking for the hope, looking to join with the other groups to fight back, like similar to 1988. Also, a lot of people who wants to remain inside because they think the youth or Generation Z, they take up the arms training and they will come back and fight. And it will be very interesting they think, maybe some of my friends told me that it will be interesting to watch how they're going to fight back this military, which they think its military is not as strong as 1988. So that's why I think less people on the streets. That's why I said it. Military is maybe last 2 weeks winning. They're trying to push away, and they even on the media they said that now we have a control over the media. Only the online media that we still don't have a control, which is the Irrawaddy is one of them. They don't have a control over the online media. That's why they are making a threat to cut down the fiber and internet line for almost a week or two, or to be extended to 3 months, because they want to shut down the country and to control the population as much as they can. Okay.
Sorry for not unmuting. We have again more than three interesting questions. I will first one is about COVID-19. In the midst of all this, people do worry or not, or is not a concern. At the same time, with COVID in the country as well, neighboring country, and the hospital malfunctioning, is it going to affect people? Because of course, COVID is continuing in the spite of all. So how you see the COVID situation? The other three questions, I will link it up because they are all related about foreign pressure and foreign relation with Myanmar. So the first is what you think of the reaction of the 31 of March at the UN Security Council when Russia and China both opposed the use of stronger language. This related to what you have said about China seeking for or having a meeting with CRPH representative, and what is so how is China playing with that? What is their objective? What they are trying to achieve according to you? And related again to another powerful neighbor of Myanmar, what is the role of India in all this? So the last question about China and Russia and the India role are separate questions, but I have put it together for you to give an overview of basically how neighboring country and the international community are related with Myanmar.
You know, last three questions are very good. They're all good, but COVID is, we had a joke. COVID question, I don't answer lightly. All questions are taken seriously, okay? But COVID is, we were very busy covering COVID issue in 2020. And we were very busy, the team inside and outside. And not only to take care of your own team for their own health issues and safety, but also the economic issues. And since last year, actually the country and the people are under stress. If you talk to everyone inside the country, they lost jobs, they lost their career, they lost hope because of the COVID. And then we had a coup d'etat. So you can see that even under the NLD government, there were at least the figures of the infection rates and how the COVID vaccine were introduced, and the education and weekly programs, and you know, kind of a system to deal with this COVID. When we had an outbreak in June or July, August in Rakhine State, and then spread to Yangon, finally, then you know the complacency was challenged, and people you know, who had lowered their guard and become much more aggressive and much more frightened and worried about the COVID. And even though there are a lot of shortcomings of the elected NLD government, the NLD government and the related relevant agency or health ministry are trying to counter this health issue, this pandemic, sorry. Also collaborating with the neighboring countries, India, China, and other countries, including the West, to get the aid and assistance and package and the vaccines, and in some stage, even better than some other neighboring countries, the way that they try to manage to get a vaccine. But after the coup, we have no information about COVID. And also, there was a joke I want to end with that in that question, which is people in Myanmar now said that COVID even afraid of the military coup and afraid of the people resistant movement, and COVID ran away because of people movement, and so strong that there were millions, thousands of people on the street, and COVID there's COVID, run away. But it's not to be treated lightly, because this regime, the hospitals are empty, and I don't think they really know how to handle this COVID situation. The only few things remark that I can see, that I saw and I read is oh, they are saying that COVID is somehow under control, which is not true. So this part, we have very little information about what is happening with the COVID patients and the COVID, ongoing COVID and pandemic. And I've seen some diplomats taking a COVID shots and jabs and being used as a regime, as a propaganda public relations stance. I think 2 or 3 days ago, I think Chinese, or I'm sure, I think Indian ambassador was get a jab and then used as a public relation exercise by the military regime. That's all I can say. And the question on Russia, China, I think we need another session to discuss. But I think during the Armed Forces Day, I think we didn't cover it in the first session. During the Armed Forces Day, you probably have seen that Deputy Defense Minister from Russia arrived. And this was kind of very surprising to a lot of people. And Russia became the first country to break the regime isolation. That also surprised China, maybe. That also surprised a lot of countries and governments. Myanmar has seen as a market for hardware. I don't think Russia cares anything, but wherever there are conflicts, Russia will come. And it is all about to sell the military hardware to the country. And if the more that we go into the armed conflict, it is good, because of now the military in Burma use a lot of Russia system, Russia train. And every year we have hundreds of military officers go to Moscow or other parts of Russia for training and academic studies and research. So I think Russia is deeply, as we predicted before, deeply engaged with the military for the defense. Also, they see that as Russia is becoming more and more, selling the more and more sophisticated weapons, jet fighters to Southeast Asia. And they see the Southeast Asia as their market, like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Myanmar or Bangladesh, which are buying a lot of latest models of Sukhoi jet fighters from Russia, which is they are here. They are there in Myanmar to cozy to cuddle with the regime. And then China is very important. As I said earlier, China is the key because of largest investor. Russia is not largest investor. Russia was interested in energy sector in Myanmar, but they are not largest investor. China is one of the largest investors in our country, also the aid donor. And if China wants to intervene in our country to stop the violence, China will do that, along with ASEANs. I still think China is the key, because of China can still avert the civil war. Because of there's destabilization and instability in our country will hurt the China geopolitical interest. And China's Belt and Road Initiative projects inside the country. And the China geopolitical interest in the Bay of Bengal and to the exit to the Indian Ocean. So in that case, I think China's role is very crucial, not only because of geostrategic interest, but also I think if the risk is huge and significant, and China will intensifying the pressure on the military junta to refrain from the violence and negotiate, or we're trying to negotiate, we're trying to force to negotiate with the ousted National League for Democracy and Aung San Suu Kyi, who is now under detention. So I think the key of China is important, not because I'm a pro-China. I think you can also see that there are a lot of anti-China sentiment and elements taking place in since the military coup, because the Chinese Chinese came out and said that this is a major reshuffle. They don't call it coup d'etat. I think China has, somehow lost it. China is facing a very difficult position. No sympathy to China, of course. What I'm saying is China has invested in the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi. And they now realize that they better on the wrong horse. And the military came back and grabbed the power. And now China is put in a very awkward position. So I think that's why I think China trying to establish contact with the CRPH, and also they don't want to lose their previous position of being a big brother and a big influential power. But also China is very worried about the rising Western influence in our country. If you look at the last 3 months, people talking about human rights, people talking about self-determination, people talking about federal democracy, people talking about democracy. All these words, particularly the CDM movement, civil disobedience movement, China's hates it. China don't want it. And this is something that China is very, very worried about, how the Myanmar population is reacting to this, and how Myanmar population is becoming more and more anti-China. But also, let me put it in very discreet, you read my lip, okay? I don't know other elements, how they're exploiting into this anti-China sentiment inside that country. I don't want to name names because I don't have evidence yet. Because last 2 weeks and 3 weeks, you can see that a lot of Chinese owned, some are not Chinese owned, but some are unfortunately Taiwanese owned. Factories are being burned down to ground in Yangon. But it was accused that the arson is, but we don't know who is behind. But it was very well organized attack on those particular factories. It is hard to say protesters who are on the run, who are calling for the peaceful protest, if they are really behind this fire, attacking, targeting a Chinese factory, or who else, who are more well-trained, who are much more, I think, more resourceful to burn down these factories. I think they are exploiter. I cannot say, I won't say who, because we don't have evidence yet, but definitely there are elements who are exploiting this situation in this. And you know that there are people, not only the Burmese people, but also the military itself is very anti-China. But for China, whoever is in the power, they will make a deal. They will work to deal. And this is the thing, something that Russia comes in. China was put in a very awkward position. And this is how the military is trying to outflank those geopolitical rivals to say that who is going to work with me? I'm the one who have the power. So anyway, to cut it short, I think China has expressed to work with Asean to end the violence. And so I think we have to see how apart from the US is always been very important key player. US will take the moral high ground. US will put the economic sanction, targeted sanction, but not to hurt the population, but very targeted individual sanctions. But also I think there are regional players, not only China, but also Japan, which is the largest donors, also largest investor, who is also afraid of China's rising influence inside the country over the past 2 or 3 years. So then India has its own geostrategic interest in our country, not because of Myanmar, but also the northeast frontier, because of the insurgency along the border areas, which used to get the support from China. But also China itself. India is still sticking around, inside, and not making too much of noise, not using a stronger language, in this military coup, but also watching and closely. But you might say more openly that in New Delhi sitting on the fence, and they still don't know, being very skittish, typical India behavior, that being skittish and they being not sure which side they're going to take it, because there are a lot of factors to consider, because of not only because of Myanmar itself, but also China factor and their own northeast frontier, but also what is happening in the Rakhine state. And I think India is going, I think, very cautiously. I don't think India is very happy with what is happening. But what is important to note is that India is changing the refugee policy, because a lot of also people, refugees, activists, some prominent members of the CDM people movement had fled to India. India did not push them back, of course, but there are some story of they were closing the border, but finally they allowed them to come in. So I think India is on a humanitarian ground, I think, allowing them to come and then taking care of these refugees along the border areas. And if there's a prolonged crisis inside the country, India itself is a member of the Quad. It's along with Australia, along with the US, along with Japan. I think India has to act like under the Quad. So I think this is something that we have to see, how the geopolitical rivalry, the middle power equivalent over Burma, and ASEAN, whether ASEAN will have the bones, or ASEAN will have enough courage to say something much more, using a more stronger language. Because the language, I always said, it matter, because generals know and read, interpret what language you are using. They are very clever at doing that. That's why I keep telling my ASEAN friends and whoever that what language you use is very important when you engage with the military junta. Thank you very much.
This is perfect what you are saying, because the last question is, are you optimistic about the Asian summit?
Oh.
So I think what you have said about language, ASEAN language, is very much in line with this last question before we close this update about, are you optimistic about the ASEAN summit? There are other questions which related to the sanction, but I think you have already answered in the sense that are targeted sanction, not general sanction. And a question I have myself about, again, related to ASEAN, because we see Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia, but they may not be on the same wave in all. They may have different ideas about how the conflict is to be solved. Like Malaysia seems to have visited Myanmar, and that has brought some concern about the first country in Asia to formally recognize, in a sense, a government representative. So maybe you can conclude this update with your thought about what are you expecting from the next ASEAN summit, and how you see this relationship between Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia playing out.
I think a good question that ASEANs always talk about. I mean, whenever we had a crisis, we always miss, we always miss Surin Pisuwan, one of the charismatic, outstanding foreign ministers in Thailand. And I used to know him. I think you guys probably know him very well. That I think ASEAN's is always been disappointing, but at the same time, those foreign minister, even former Thai foreign minister, even the deputy prime minister Sciortino, they were even in the early stage, last 2 or 3 weeks, and they were already voiced their concern, and they were talking about intervention and or need to intervene in Myanmar crisis, which I think is quite interesting. But ASEAN itself is very disappointing, and that's why if ASEAN failed to act this time on Burma or Myanmar crisis, the ASEAN credibility will be lost forever, and the so-called ASEAN's centrality, there will be no centrality in ASEAN because Myanmar or the regime is the weakest link in ASEAN. ASEAN are members countries, and they build on a consensus. And that's why I'm saying that the regime is looking at individually on each ASEAN members, and they were manipulated. They were applying the Biden rule strategy. They know that how Thailand position itself. They know how Indonesia and Singapore taking a different kind of measure, and also, as well as Malaysia, as their own his own position over Burma, and also other members. For instance, more importantly, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. These three countries are quiet, and understandable why they are quiet, right? So they were always be quiet, if not sleeping. So I think that's why I think. But when Myanmar or Burma destabilize, you will have tons of problems coming into your border areas. COVID, refugees, war, conflict, drugs, arms, economic problems. It is Myanmar or Burma is inside ASEAN. It is not a country far, miles and miles or far away from somewhere in Africa or Atlantic. It is inside the ASEAN. So ASEAN is important to act, I think. Even if they don't have a guts or if they don't want to, they will be forced to deal with Myanmar situation, I think. Because if they just drag on, the Myanmar's naughtiness, Myanmar is a problem child in ASEAN. Myanmar is the weakest link in ASEAN. ASEAN will have to come out to fix it. Otherwise, and my worry is other regional powers, like as we mentioned before, Japan, China, and India, and other superpower, like in the US and West, will come into it, and will become much more difficult to contain the crisis because we don't have any kind of policy how to work on, stop the violence, and how to intervene in Myanmar. That's why I think the ASEANs need to work with the other regional powers to stop the violence and to find a peaceful solution. Language is important.
So with this awful message, I have my own view about ASEAN, and unfortunately, as ASEAN often reflects the position of the member countries, it's going to be very difficult to get one clear voice on the Myanmar situation. But indeed, the need, like you said, of the impacts that the Burma situation has on the neighboring country, they cannot ignore it. So let's see if this will push them beyond their own limits.
Right.
At this point. It
right.
is really a question of how far they see that they are impacted by what is happening.
That's right.
I think also not all the country are, like you were saying, about seeing a strong democratic movement in Myanmar as also implication inspiring other democratic movement in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, look at the ASEAN countries. Some of the countries are very authoritarians. Some of the countries have seen a coup after coup later, and they will be afraid. Not only the refugees, influx of refugees, they are also afraid of the spread of multi lines. They are afraid of spread of democracy. They are afraid of spread of this kind of inspiration. The Myanmar people are so strong and so committed to fight for the last 3 decades. They never give up. And this is also some of the ASEAN countries, they don't want their people to take this as you know. So I think ASEAN itself is worried. Some of the countries, I'm saying, I'm talking all countries, some of the countries are very worried. But the destabilization of Myanmar will have a lot of major consequences, already have an effect on ASEAN, I think.
Yeah, I think it's exactly very important. The ASEAN community may actually be shaped by Myanmar at the level of people.
True.
There is a lot of talk about ASEAN as a
True.
people region of the people, people-oriented or people-centered region, and maybe what is happening in and the courage of people in Myanmar will be extremely relevant for the forming of a real ASEAN. So
That's
with
true.
awful word, I think we conclude this second updates, and we look forward to meeting again in 2 weeks to hear how the summit has gone, and many other. Hopefully, there will not be too bloody weeks, but hopefully there will see some constructive steps for a better Myanmar and a better ASEAN. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Sao, for this enlightening session, and to all the people that participated, see you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.